All right, we are right at 7 o'clock. Thank you everyone so much for joining. I'm going to go over a few announcements for us while I continue to monitor our waiting room, making sure that everyone is entered. So first and foremost, a few announcements from Alachua Audubon Society. We do have a couple of big events coming up that you should definitely be aware of. This Thursday, we do have a bird ramble birding trip out at Bar Hammock. If you are interested, please get in contact with us and let us know that you'll be joining. We also have a number of field trips coming up that can all be accessed via our most recent newsletter, our social media pages, and our website. And of course, the other really big event we have coming up is the Backyard Bird Tour on February 18th. That is an awesome fundraiser event that we're really excited to bring back post-COVID. Tickets are already on sale at Wild Birds Unlimited. And if you're interested in volunteering, in addition to participating in the event, please let us know that as well, as we are looking for volunteers to table. Or if you're just interested in touring the houses, that is also available to you for sure. A week from that, the next Saturday after that, on February 25th is also our Pints and Predators event. So be sure to mark both of those on your calendar. I think that's everything I have for now. If you do have any questions about what's going on with the Alachua Audubon Society, definitely check our website and our social media pages. All right. It is just a minute after 7. I'm going to give a couple more minutes for people to join before we get started. So just bear with me just for a minute. As a reminder for everyone, please do keep yourselves muted throughout the entire presentation, just so we make sure everyone can hear really well and get all that information that they need. Undoubtedly, there might be some questions. If you do have any questions at any time, please feel free to pop them in the chat, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can just address that to everyone or to me specifically, and I will go through all those questions at the end. There will also be time at the end for you to voice any questions you have in turn by raising your hand. You can also find that option at the bottom or just speak out when that time comes. All right. Well, it is definitely my pleasure to introduce Adam Kent, who really doesn't need any introduction for how amazing of a birder and amazing resource he is here in Alachua County, all over Florida, and birding from all over the world. Adam is going to talk to us about sparrows here in North Florida and how to ID them and how to find them, which we're really excited about and is super timely for this time of year. Adam's passion for birds started when he was a child, and that enthusiasm for the natural world has led him to a variety of biologist positions, and as it sparked his passion for birds. He has previously worked for the Great Florida Birding Trail as Florida's first scrub jay conservation coordinator, and is currently a biological consultant and natural history tour leader. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please enjoy the presentation, and Adam, please take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, Zach. Thank you everyone for tuning in on this chilly Saturday night. And I also want to thank all the awesome photographers who have lent me their photos. I have credited everybody there at some place on the screen. If there's no mark, that means I took the picture, which is very few of them. So for example, this beautiful Bachman sparrow right here, Michael Drummond took this picture, and we'll see some more of his photos later in the presentation. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects, which is sparrows. They are beautiful and fun to identify and a great challenge. And okay, let's get this going. There we go. And here is another example of a beautiful sparrow. This is a LeConte sparrow taken by another Gainesville birder, Chris Burney. And what I'm going to do tonight is talk a little bit about the process for identifying sparrows. And then I'll go through some field marks of several North Florida sparrows, not coastal, but central interior North Florida sparrows, and then briefly mention some resources. What I'm not going to do is just give you a list of 20 or 25 sparrows you could potentially find in Alachua County and list off a whole bunch of field marks, because at some point that's just too much and no brain can hold that information, and it becomes, you know, overwhelming. So instead we'll focus on the process and some techniques to help you get better at identifying sparrows and other birds too. So with any bird, there are only 3 clues to identify the bird in the field. That's the bird's behavior, what it does, its appearance, what does it look like, and the distribution in time and space. And I'll talk more about each of these and how they relate to sparrows. And to remember these 3 clues, you can just imagine being a bad birder, BAD, behavior, appearance, distribution. So let's look more closely at each of these clues. So behavior is the first of the clues. Anything a bird does, including sounds, and sounds are very, very important for identification of almost any kind of bird, including sparrows, but they're also hard to describe. When you try to add sound to presentations, you often run into technical difficulties, and different people hear sounds differently. So I'm going to spend very little time talking about sounds today, but I will talk about some other behaviors. So imagine you're at a nice open field with some shrubs scattered here and there, a little tree line in the background, a great place to find sparrows. And you're walking through the field. What kind of behaviors might you notice on sparrows? So one is simple behavior is there one of them, or are they in a flock? If you're walking through the field, do they flush up? Do they flush when you're almost right next to them, or do they flush from a distance? When they flush, do they fly up into a tree like a Vesper Sparrow usually does? Do they fly into a bush like Savannah Sparrows often do? Or do they fly a short distance, kind of weak flyers, and land back in the grass? That could be a Henslow's or a Grasshopper Sparrow. And of course, behaviors are a little bit plastic, and it's not saying that a Grasshopper Sparrow couldn't fly in a bush or a Vesper Sparrow couldn't fly back into the grass, but there are some things that are fairly consistent. And if you see a sparrow flush at a distance from low grass and fly up pretty far high up into a tree, there's a decent chance that's going to be a Vesper Sparrow, even if you didn't get any looks at any of the field marks. So pay attention to various behaviors that the sparrows do. The next clue is the appearance, and this is the clue that most people focus on and that we'll spend the most time on. Although don't forget these other clues too. Knowing this behavior clue is really important, so think about that also. And then the distribution, we'll talk about that later. But appearance is where we'll spend the most time. So their appearance can be broken down. For sparrows, there are 3 important parts to the appearance clue: the structure, and this is important for all birds. And in sparrows specifically, one of the things you want to look at is tail length. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The streaking on the underparts, and then the pattern on the head. So let's talk about structure first. And when you're looking at structure with any bird, you like to compare part of the bird to another part of the bird. So in this drawing right here, as we look at it more closely, you'll see that tail. It looks pretty short, but how does the length of the tail compare to the body? Well, it's about half the length of the body or so. So comparing something like the tail length to the length of the body of the bird is a good technique. Same thing that you could do with the beak. How big is the beak compared to the rest of the head? Same thing with head projection. Is the head, does it project a lot or just a little bit? Is it more rounded or not? So looking at something like tail length, though, and comparing it to the rest of the body is very important. So this is a Savannah Sparrow, and you can do this yourself. If you get any photo of a bird and put it in PowerPoint or something, you can trace over it or use tracing paper. It's a good way to get a feeling for different shapes of birds. So here's a short-tailed sparrow. This one, would you say that tail is short or long? Well, this is about as long compared to a body as it gets. This sparrow's tail, if you took from the place where the tail meets the body to the end of the tail, and you flipped it backwards, that tail would be about as long as the whole sparrow's body. So that's a long tail. That's a song sparrow, relatively long-tailed sparrow. And then on this one, this is where it gets tricky. If the bird's facing you, you're going to have features that are foreshortened. So this sparrow is, what is it? What does it look like? Okay, that's a swamp sparrow. And because it's facing us, it's a little bit harder to judge the length of the tail, but that shape of a swamp sparrow is almost exactly the same as the shape of a song sparrow. Um, Here's another sparrow, another beautiful Michael Drummond photo, and another foreshortened tail. The bird's facing us, the tail is facing away, and so it's hard to judge how long it is. So when you're trying to judge a bird's shape and proportions, it helps to watch it for a while and see the different angles. And that's one of the reasons photos can be so tricky if you're trying to identify a bird. If you just saw this one photo of the bird, it'd be hard to say if it had a long or short tail. But if you watched it for a while and you saw it turn, you'd finally get a good angle sooner or later, hopefully, or if you saw it fly away, you'd see it's got a relatively long tail like that silhouette we saw a little while ago. This is a song sparrow. And here's another song sparrow from a different angle, also foreshortened, but facing towards us. Another thing that is useful in lots of birds, it's not one of the most important field marks for sparrows, but it can be useful, is whether or not the tail has a notch. In this bird, it looks like the tail has a notch because the outer tail feathers form this little bit of a fork or notch, and the inner tail feathers are still growing in a little bit. It looks like it may have lost its tail, maybe to a predation event or something like that. So there are exceptions to rules on things like tail shape. This bird, this is another song sparrow, and its tail would be as long as its body and rounded, but because there's something weird going on with the tail, it looks like it's got a medium short, really forked tail. And some of these things just take some practice to get used to. And you have to think, that's why you want to use multiple clues to identify a bird. Not only the tail, but the streaking below and the head pattern and things like that. So underpart streaking is the next one of the, and I like to think of it as three categories of underpart streaking. Something like this song sparrow here, where they're definitely, no question, it's got streaks or little chevrons or arrows or some distinct markings below. You can see the long tail again in this song sparrow there because of the angle. So this one is definitely streaked below. Here's the chipping sparrow. It's definitely not streaked below, there's no question. And this one really does have a forked tail. These feathers are grown out all the way. So we've got it definitely streaked in the song, definitely not streaked in chipping. And then there's something like this young white-throated sparrow. If you've got to think to yourself, are those streaks or not? It's probably not really streaked below. These are what are fit in the category of very faint streaks or don't really count as streaks. So some birds will have really weak streaked patterns, like some of these, some individual white-throated sparrows, and this is goes into the not really streaked category. On the other hand, some birds that are normally not streaked below, like chipping sparrows, when they're juveniles, they do have streaks below. In fact, all juvenile sparrows are streaked below. But the good news in Florida is that they only hold that juvenile plumage for a few weeks. And by the time they're migrating to Florida, they've molted into their, usually it's a plumage that doesn't have streaks below. Another hint this bird is a juvenile is these baby lips or the fleshy gape on the beak. And you also usually see, if a bird is in this juvenile plumage, a songbird, you'll see an adult nearby. So there are, if you're birding in a different state, someplace where you see juvenile sparrows, you could see a juvenile Bachman sparrow somewhere in Florida that would be streaked below, but it should be near an adult, and you'll have the rest structurally, it'll look like the adult. Another thing you hear about in field guides is the central breast spot, and a lot of guides will say this is a distinctive field mark for this one species of sparrow, like the lark sparrow or American tree sparrow. And in reality, most sparrows and a lot of birds have dark feathers that are dark at the base, and in the center of the breast, these feathers come together. And sometimes if they get ruffled, like on this white crown sparrow, it'll look like they have a dark spot on the center of their chest. Now this one is so close and such a nice close-up photo that you can tell these photos look out of place. But if that bird were even just twice as far away, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, it's got a dark breast spot. What would it be if you just focus on the breast spot? And the converse is also true. Birds that are supposed to have a dark breast spot don't always have it. This is only like 1 in 100 where you're going to see something weird like this, but it doesn't always hold true. So the head pattern is the most important pattern that you're looking for, apart from the streaking. And this is a Henslow sparrow here, which has some great distinctive patterns. And once you get to recognize these patterns and memorize what to look for, your sparrow identification will come a lot more easily. And the trick is, because in Florida, what we're looking at is mostly wintering sparrows, you have to be prepared because they're not sitting up singing. They might pop up for a second to get a look at you, and then they might pop back down and you might not see it again. So you have to really be prepared. And this is a pretty crowded slide with all these different terms. Most of these terms for parts of the head make sense. This is the terminology I like to use, and this is what Sibley uses. Every good field guide will have a bird topography or terminology section someplace, usually in the beginning of the book. And so you can look at that, and then you can look at photographs in the book and try to describe it yourself. And this presentation will be posted on the Alachua Audubon website, so you can go through and do a screenshot of this later if you want. Most of these terms make sense, like median crown stripe. It's a stripe down the middle of the crown. Eye ring, a pale ring around the eye. One word that is not such common usage outside of birding is the lores, the area between the eye and the beak. And if that's dark, it can give the bird a concerned or serious or even a mean expression. Whereas if it's pale, it could give the bird a surprised or innocent or even stupid expression, some people say. Another bit of terminology that will vary from guide to guide is these markings on either side of the throat, the lateral throat stripe, the malar area, and then the mustache stripe. And they're, depending on the book you're looking at, those terms may vary a little bit. So you need to kind of check the start of your book and see which terminology the author will be using as they describe the sparrow. And if you're prepared, then you could be like this little expert here, who's identifying a LeConte sparrow based on the streaking on the sides, the orangish tone to the eyebrow and the malar. The malar, remember, is the area and just past between the lateral throat stripe and the mustache stripe. Purplish marking on the nape, the back of the neck, and the silver auricular, or the cheek patch. That's a LeConte sparrow. And there it is. Very distinctive once you know what to look for. Last clue for bird identification for all species of birds is distribution. The red here is summer only, blue is winter only, purple is all seasons, yellow is migration. So you can see chipping sparrows are only in Florida in the winter, just like most other sparrows. So if you see something in June and you think it might be a chipping sparrow, you're probably not really looking at a chipping sparrow. It's probably something else. So it's useful to understand location. Another part of distribution is habitat. And here's our sparrow expert again, out in perfect sparrow habitat. This is at the start of Lachua Trail. Nice grassy, brushy area. Our expert's hearing a grasshopper sparrow out here. So when you're going out sparrowing, you want to make an effort to go to these places that have a lot of sparrows. One sparrow closely tied to a certain habitat that breeds in North Florida is the Bachman sparrow, and they are in pine woods. In fact, the old name for them is the pine wood sparrow. Typical sparrow habitat, though, like for this white crown sparrow, is brushy tangle out maybe by a field. You can use eBird to look at, this is another part of the distribution clue. There's distribution in terms of place that we looked at. And now this is distribution in terms of time. And I've circled Bachman's and chipping sparrow bar charts from eBird. And you can see Bachman sparrows are here year-round. Chipping sparrows are only here in the winter, and they arrive in fall and leave in spring. Their numbers thin out pretty quickly. And then Bachman sparrows are very uncommonly reported from about September to December. And they don't leave, they just get really secretive at that time. But for studying your sparrows or studying any kind of bird, to predict what could be there and how common it might be. So I highly recommend looking at these bar charts. So let's go through this process again before we get into all the sparrows. You're out in a field, you see a group of sparrows fly up, they flush from you're fairly close to them, they flush up, they land in some bushes. They've got short tails relative to the rest of their body length. They've got a pretty distinct facial pattern, a little bit of pale at the front of the eyebrow, not really big head, pale pink legs. This is going to be a Savannah Sparrow. This is one of our most common sparrows in the winter here in all kinds of open areas in Alachua County. So let's look at some more Alachua County sparrows. And what I'm going to do, that name will pop up after I show the picture of the bird. Try to guess what it is yourself on your own. This will give you a hint on what sparrows you might need a little bit more work with. So what do you think this is? All right, this is a song sparrow. They like brushy areas. They're even in wetlands. It's a medium-sized sparrow. The tail's about as long as the body. We talked about that before when we were looking at structure. They're definitely streaked below. We talked about that with underpart streaking. They've got distinct streaks on their face, starting with a pale throat, which is a little hard to see in this photo, and then a pale median crown stripe, which is also a little bit blocked, but then they've got dark lateral throat stripes, a pale malar here, pale mustache, a dark mustache stripe here, a paler cheek or auricular, a dark postocular, broad pale eyebrow, dark lateral crown stripes, and then that pale median crown stripe, which again is a little hard to see because of this angle. And this is one that is also often detected because of its call. It's a jimp call note, and if you have any birding app and you play the jimp or just listen to some of the call notes of song sparrow, that's one that's a good one to know. They're pretty common in the winter, but they're also fairly secretive. So they're more easily seen than heard in the wintertime. All right, another sparrow in that same genus, which means if you're looking at the scientific name of the bird, scientific names always have two parts. The first part of the scientific name is the genus, and that's important to look at because it tells you the relationship of that bird to other birds that are, and birds that are in the same genus are often very similar. So here, what kind of bird is this? Do you think you have a guess? All right, this is the swamp sparrow, same genus, Melospiza, as the song sparrow. This one, the tail is a little foreshortened because it's pointed at us, but it's almost exactly the same shape as a song sparrow. The pattern's different though. It's not streaked below. It's got a lot more rufous of it, including a rufous wash on the sides, big rufous panel on the greater coverts of the wing, and a rufous panel in the wing itself, and a little bit more grayish overall color on the head. And these are mostly in marshes. Marsh sparrow, at least in Florida in the winter, would be a better name for these guys. And here's another sparrow in that same genus. These are often found, well, anyone want to guess what that is? Okay, take a guess for yourself. This is Lincoln sparrow. They like little shrubby areas, often near wetlands. They're also a Melospiza, the same genus as the previous two species, but they're a little bit smaller and daintier, a little smaller, thinner tail. They're definitely streaked below, but it's a little bit finer streaking, and the streaking is over a buffy wash. They also have a buffy malar, which is distinctive. The other song sparrow and swamp sparrows have a whitish malar, and their facial features are a little more, their patterning and overall shapes are a little more delicate than the previous two species. All right, here's a very common wintering sparrow. Look how short that tail is structurally. That's not that foreshortened, so it's only about half as big as the body. The same pattern as a song sparrow with pale throat, darker lateral throat stripe, etc. Pale, dark, pale, dark. Often a little bit, okay, what do you think this is? All right, Savannah Sparrow, our most commonly observed sparrow in the winter. The front of the eyebrow, also known as a supraloral, is often yellowish, but not always. Maybe 10% or more don't have much yellow in the lowers. They're definitely streaked below, nice crisp dark streaking, and they're variable. Some of them are this kind of brown and light and darker brown streaks. Some are more grayish, some look more blackish, some even look a little bit more reddish or rufous colored. But it's one of our more common sparrows. They like open areas. They often perch up, sweet water, any open fields, great places to see these. All right, here's another sparrow of open areas. Try to guess what this one is for just a second here. All right, this is a little bigger than a Savannah sparrow, longer tailed. That's a Vesper Sparrow. They're chunkier, they're longer tail. They are still streaked below. Sometimes the streaking can kind of mush together on the chest, so it almost looks like a breast band, but they are streaked. Their facial pattern is not as distinct as a Savannah or a song sparrow. They do have a pale throat and a distinct lateral throat stripe, and then this pale malar area. But then the rest of it, once you get up into the auriculars and the eyebrow and the crown stripe and all that, there are all these other darker streaks mixed in there. So it's not, the facial pattern doesn't stand out that much. Now, if you're looking at them from behind, you're barely seeing this pale malar area, and all these other facial patterns all blend together. You can see a white eye ring often if the light's right. They have white outer tail feathers, but you have to get a good look at them to see it. I'd say half the time I see these things flying away, you cannot see the outer tail feathers just because of the angle that they're flying or the lighting or something like that. But they're bigger than Savannah sparrows, longer tailed, chunkier, bigger headed. They're the ones that if you flush them, they love to fly up into a tall tree. Not always, of course, but they will often fly up in a little, they're usually in little groups too, but not always, and flying into a taller tree. All right, here's one of my favorite sparrows, a little red bird with a green head. Not very common and very, very secretive. This is Henslow sparrow. Distinctive pattern. No other bird in Florida is red with a green head, and they're distinctly streaked below. They're the same structure in a way as a Savannah sparrow. In fact, all these secretive grassy sparrows a long time ago were in the same genus. It has a short tail, big head. This one's got a pretty big beak, but this green head stands out. Nothing else has a green head like that. You also notice the white eye ring, distinct lateral throat stripe and mustache stripe. These will, if you're trying to find them, you might be walking through a field, you see a sparrow that flushes up, you walk to where it landed, and it doesn't fly up again. That's because they hit the ground and they run. And it's not that unusual that they will just land and run away and you might never see it again. And sometimes we'll do special field trips just to try to find Henslow sparrows. All right, here's a quiz bird. How well did you get the first few species? So we're by some water. This is a marsh, and here's a bird. Is it streaked below or not? Well, it's kind of diffuse. It's not necessarily that clear. We're going to put that in the not really streaked below because it's not streaked enough. It's got a lot of rufous in the tail. It looks like it probably has a pretty long, kind of a lot of gray on the head. That is a swamp sparrow. You can't see the rufous flanks, but they're common sweetwater wetlands. Almost any wetland with a bunch of emergent vegetation will have swamp sparrows in the winter in Florida. And they do call a loud, sharp call note. Reminds me a little of a phoebe's call. All right, some more sparrows. Here you go. What do you think about this one? Another great Gainesville photographer here. That's the Grasshopper Sparrow. So these are also in this group, used to be in the same genus as the Henslow Sparrow, of these secretive grass sparrows with short tails, not streaked below in this case. The genus will give you more hint into the bird's shape than it will into the bird's pattern. But this is not they've recently split the Grasshopper Sparrow and Henslow Sparrow into different genera. That's the plural of genus. So anyway, Grasshopper Sparrow, the only member of its genus in North America right now, not streaked below, smaller sparrow, secretive, usually hiding in the grass, but they're actually fairly common all throughout the whole peninsula of Florida in the winter. There's a population in south central Florida that breeds the Florida Grasshopper Sparrow, highly endangered. They give the impression when they fly of being a little bit more straw colored or yellowish, whereas the Henslow Sparrow, when they flush, if you're walking along when flushes out of the grass, if you have good lighting, they look more brownish, a little more darker brown. And these guys will often sit up on a little plum or some little shrub, and they often have a little oranginess in their face. Otherwise, white eye ring and no lateral throat stripe or anything like that. Not a lot of facial markings compared to some other sparrows. Fairly common and often mixed in with groups of Savannah sparrows. If you see a whole bunch of Savannah sparrows in the area and they're flushing up, don't just think to yourself, oh, it's all Savannah sparrows, I'll try to find something else. Pick through all those Savannah sparrows that perch up, and good chance you could run into a Grasshopper Sparrow mixed in with all the other Savannahs there. All right, here's another one. We're getting into our larger sparrows. These are sparrows in the genus Zonotrichia. Anybody want to guess what this one is? Give you a second to think about it. All right. This is a white-throated sparrow. Now, a lot of sparrows have white throats, so that name doesn't really narrow down your choices. If you're looking at the scientific names, like I mentioned, this is a Zonotrichia, and the Zonotrichia sparrows are the largest sparrows in Florida. That means line thrush, and they're named because they have these stripes on their head. White-throated sparrows have the black and white stripes on their head. And white-throated sparrows specifically always have this yellow in the supraloral, or the front of their eyebrow, above their lores. They're large sparrows, as I mentioned. They've got a long tail. They're big and chunky. They like thickets and tangles, especially vine tangles, and they'll even be in the woods, whereas some other sparrows, most other sparrows are more out in the open. But a good place to find white-throated sparrows along the Railta Trail, Hawthorne Trail near La Chua, and some of those hilly areas where you've got big tangles of vines. They like to hang out in those areas. And white-throated sparrow has an interesting thing. There are two different color morphs. There's the tan morph, which is the ones on the left, and the white morph, the ones on the right. The tan morphs are more grayish on their chest. They're black and white striped on the head as opposed to tan and dark brown. The tan morphs also have dark lateral throat stripes that are distinctive. The white morphs, those lateral throat stripes are usually not easy to see. They have an interesting mating system. The white morphs are more aggressive. They have better territories. The tan morphs are better at caring for their young. And so it works out that 99.99% or something like that of the pairs are of the opposite morph. That's called negative assortative mating. And it's not like a morph of a short-tailed hawk or a great egret where there's different color morphs, but they mate with whoever. There's actually different functions for each morph, and they mate with the opposite morph. It's just a kind of a neat thing that you'll see just with white-throated sparrows. It's very unusual, actually, to have this negative assortative mating, unusual in the bird world. All right, another species of Zonotrichia sparrow. Oh, I wanted to mention one other thing. On white-throated sparrows, look at the crown streaking. It goes all the way from the top of their head, and postocular behind the eye, all the way down to the back. That streaking covers this whole area, including the nape. Now, this is another closely related sparrow, another Zonotrichia. Anyone want to guess what that is? Well, we're not doing this live, so here we go. This is a white crown sparrow. Also has a white throat, but it's not set off by any darker boundary. And the stripes on the head, the black and white stripes, don't go down the nape. It's a similar shape in general to the white-throated sparrow, but they're thinner. They are large sparrows with a long tail, but they're overall thinner. A little bit more protruding, smaller, rounded head, not as chunky as the white-throated sparrow. And these are more often out in the open, but they do like shrubby areas, like in the middle of a big field in shrubby areas. Now, white crowned sparrows have an interesting thing. It's not the same thing that's going on with white-throated sparrows. They have this, what you might think is a tan morph, but this is actually a young bird. It is less than a year old. It's not a juvenile. Remember, juvenile sparrows, they only hold that plumage for a few weeks. So it's more than a few weeks old, but this is called the formative plumage. This is the first plumage after the juvenile plumage, but before their definitive basic or adult plumage. And a lot of the birds you'll see in Florida look like this, where the streaking on the head is brown and grayish as opposed to black and white. But note again, the streaking doesn't come down on the nape. The shape is the same. It's a little thinner than the white-throated sparrows, and it looks a lot like a chipping sparrow actually, but they're a lot bigger and chunkier than chipping sparrows, a little bit more peaked crown, especially when they're excited. The pattern of that line through the eye, it's not as distinct behind the eye. And there are a lot of other subtle differences that are, it really takes watching them for a while to pick up on it because they are easy to confuse with the chipping sparrow. All right, quiz bird, what do you think this is? So you're out in the woods, you're in a nice vine thicket, you hear a couple loud chip notes from the bushes and you pish and this thing pops up for just a second and you see it's a big sparrow with a big head, a long tail, not really streaked below. You've got the stripes in the head and stripes in the throat, on the side of the throat. It's white throat, but you also have these lateral throat stripes and the yellow supraloral. Yep, that's going to be the white-throated sparrow. So Couple more. How about this one? This is one of the least appreciated sparrows out there, partially because it's not really a sparrow, and it's at least not in terms of New World sparrows. If you see that with the male, you'd probably get it. That's a house sparrow, female on the right, male on the left. And if you saw it in its natural habitat, you'd also probably get it. That's on a shopping center or in a fast food um, parking lot. But let's go back to this for a second. I also want to mention, before I get into house sparrows, Powder Mill Avian Research Center is a great organization. It's a bird banding and bird conservation group in Pennsylvania that has awesome comparison photographs on their website. So you can check those guys out and see, learn a lot from their posts and their photographs. But so house sparrows are in their own, a family of old world sparrows that are not at all closely related to the new world sparrows. They look different. It's very subtle. They're chunkier. Their bill's a different shape. Males and females are different. They're very vocal. They're always chattering, and they're often in almost always near humans. That's why they're overlooked. But next time you see a house sparrow in a parking lot, just spend some time appreciating its subtle shapes, its beak shape especially, and the females if you see them, because every once in a while a house sparrow will show up not in a parking lot, and they can confuse people. All right, here's another sparrow. This one is pretty common in feeders, especially open grassy yards in Florida in the winter. Right, that's the chipping sparrow. They are thin, they're long-tailed, tail's about as long as the body. They like open grassy areas. It could be in the woods or in lawns or fields, but they like open areas. Doesn't have to be that shrubby. As far as their pattern, they're often in groups, sometimes really big groups. Especially in the spring, you'll see this chestnut cap, really dark eye line, including the dark lores. And so this is what they look like a little bit more in the springtime. In the middle of the winter, they tend to get these little darker marks on the sides of their throat. And the bird on the bottom there, these big old dark black lamb chops, this is a plumage you rarely see illustrated in field guides. You might see a little bit of a hint of dark lateral throat stripes like the top bird, but they can get pretty serious. So chipping sparrows are a great bird because they're at feeders. They're a great one to just sit back and watch. And because you could get a group of a dozen or more chipping sparrows at a feeder, just poke through them, look and see what the variation. Some of them may be really heavily striped. Some may have darker blackish markings in their face. Some may be a lot paler. If you look at the bottom bird, the facial markings in general are darker than the top bird. And see how they vary, because it's impossible to illustrate all the variation in any one field guide, and that's where field experience comes in handy. All right, here's another one. This is a rare migrant to Florida. They're mainly western. They do come through in the fall and winter in very small numbers. They'll show up here and there. It's the same genus as the chipping sparrow, Spizella. You can't see the tail in this photo, but it's a long tail. They're basically the same shape as a chipping sparrow. This is clay-colored sparrow. They breed in the Midwest to the west, and then they winter in the Southwest and farther south. And also compared to the chipping sparrow, notice they don't have that dark eye line, especially they do not have dark lores. So they're very blank-faced look. And that's, even though it's only just a few dark feathers in front of the eye, that blank-faced look is noticeable at a long distance. Every once in a while, you could get tripped up by a bird that has a feather out of place, or it just took a bath, or its face was wet, and so it might look like it has one or two dark feathers and dark lores. But if you watch the bird for a little bit, if you have any question, often that'll only be on one side of the head. So try to get a good look at the bird if there's any question to whether or not it has dark lores. But it's usually very obvious on chipping sparrows that they do have dark lores, and on clay-colored sparrows that they have a plain face. And instead what you see is how this auricular area of the cheek stands out against the paler eyebrow, the paler nape, and the pale malar area. Here's another member of that genus Spizella. This one's fluffed up so it doesn't look as skinny as the other two, but you can see it's got a long notched tail. They don't really have giant talons here. This is just a spiny vine it's on. And little rounded head, little pink bill that's distinctive in this species more so than some other species. Not many distinct facial markings though, apart from a pale eye ring. This is a field sparrow, and grayish and kind of a rufusy, reddish, rusty color on the head and body, uh, the white eye-ring are some things to look for. The pattern, they could be more grayish or more rufusy looking. They can be really infused with rufus sometimes. They breed just less than an hour north of Gainesville. They're uncommon wintering sparrows throughout the northern part of the peninsula. Boulware Springs, right by the little pavilion there, and by the bike trail, they often show up around there. They can show up just about anywhere in open fields with shrubs, but they're not that common, and they're mainly only in the wintertime in Alachua County. All right, here's a quiz bird. So you're walking around Sweetwater. They've got mowed grass on either side of the path. This little sparrow is right there. It hops onto the path, and it's got a short tail. It's distinctly streaked below. It's got really defined facial markings. This one has its crown feathers raised, but just raised for a second, then its crown feathers go down. A little bit of sort of yellowish hint in the supraloral or the front of their eyebrow. That's a Savannah Sparrow. All right, so you want to go out sparrowing. You want to go out and get some practice learning these birds that are so fun to watch and such a challenge to get a look at because it's winter and they'll just pop up for a second. You know you have to be prepared. So what do? Well, one of the best ways to get prepared, one of the things that helps the mind remember field marks and details better than anything else is to draw the bird. And you don't have to be an artist. Just draw a few circles and lines. You can draw it. This is the same diagram I had earlier, just a little bit more simplified with all those same markings. So if you can draw a circle and some lines, you've got it down. It doesn't have to look pretty. If you can draw this, then you can look through your book or look through photos and practice drawing. And it's kind of fun to do. Just pick all the different sparrows that might be in the area, draw them. You could even use this as a template or something like this, and then just draw the markings they have. So Grasshopper Sparrow, for example, wouldn't have the lateral throat stripe, wouldn't have the mustache stripe, might have a little bit of a line behind the eye, but you know, maybe pale on the top of the head, maybe a little bit of yellow or orangish in the face. You can make a note, streaking below or not streaking below, or sometimes a little bit of streaking. But going through the book and actually drawing these things will help you remember a lot. That's your homework to do. Let me know if you do it. I'm curious how it works for you. Another great resource out there, apart from this this talk, is there's something called Bayou City Birding out of Texas, and I'm going to have this will be posted online, so you'll be able to look it up. But they've got a sparrow cheat sheet. They've got a bunch of other resources, warblers and other birds too. And they have flashcards that don't have the birds' names on them, so you could use this to quiz yourself. And if you go to White Oak Bayou Association, resources and zines on that webpage, and then you look at the bottom of that page, you'll find sparrow cheat sheets and some other things on there that will that you can use to quiz yourself and practice learning sparrows. But as I mentioned before, practicing drawing those things is really going to get it to stick in your mind. Another thing that will get it to stick in your mind is if you're going through and you're studying, instead of just looking at the picture, say it out loud to yourself. So instead of just saying, looking at it and thinking, oh, okay, it's got this, you know, rusty flanks or pale or diffuse streaking below or distinct streaking over a buffy a wash. You want to be saying that out loud, actually vocalizing that. That helps you remember. So those are a few tricks. And then when you see the bird in the field, you're prepared. First, you've got the structure down. Well, you know where you are. You know what the habitat is. You know what the behavior is. Is it by itself? Does it pop up? Does it fly away? Is it sitting in a bush? Those are all sort of subtle hints. And then the structure is length. Then you're looking at the streaking below and the facial pattern. And just want to review quickly these bird ID behaviors again. So the behavior for sparrows, the flushing, is it secretive? Does it just fly a short distance and then fly back into the grass, or does it fly really far? Does it fly up in a tree? Is it in a flock? The appearance, we'll talk about that in just a second again. We'll go over those. And then the distribution. Is it the middle of summer? Then it could only be really a couple things in Florida. In Gainesville, probably just Bachman sparrow, especially if you're in the pine woods. And for distribution, definitely recommend those eBird bar charts. And then these appearance clues again, the structure, especially the tail length compared to the body. But some other more subtle structural clues is how stocky the bird is, how big the head is, how much the head protrudes, how round it is, how big the beak is. Underpart streaking, you've got the obvious underpart streaking like song sparrow or Savannah sparrow. You've got the obvious no streaking like the Spizella sparrows, chipping, field. And then you've got the, well, maybe it's kind of streaked, but it doesn't really count, like maybe a young swamp sparrow or a younger tan morph white-throated sparrow, where it's got a little bit of streaking there, and it looks like it might be streaked, but it's not enough to really count as streaking. And that actually, I had an interesting example of that recently. I saw a young swamp sparrow, and first I saw its head and I thought, oh, swamp sparrow, but then it kind of moved around. It was really quick, and I just saw the flanks, and I saw some of the buffy wash and some pretty sharp streaking actually, not even that diffuse, but just on the flanks. And I thought, wait a minute, could that have been a Lincoln sparrow with that really distinct streaking? But the facial pattern was completely wrong. It was too big and chunky, and it didn't have enough streaking to be a Lincoln sparrow. So you do have to kind of pay attention to how much streaking it has, and don't just use one field mark. And then there's the head pattern that we went over also. And something I wanted to mention about field marks is you need to know, are the field marks you're using to identify the bird really the right field mark? So just buffy flanks with a little bit of streaking, that doesn't necessarily mean Lincoln sparrow. That could be a swamp sparrow, especially a young one. So first, make sure you're actually using the right field marks to identify the bird. Then you need to make sure that you actually saw that field mark or heard it. For example, you heard a little chip that sounded like a chipping sparrow, but are you sure that it wasn't a titmouse doing the same noise? Or you saw a bird and it had a dark and light pattern on its face and he was streaked below. That was a song sparrow. Wait, no, was it a Savannah sparrow? So what's the difference? Did you notice the tail length in that case? So that's why it helps to be prepared also to and know these field marks more so than lots of other birds in Florida in the winter. You need to be prepared for the sparrows, but it's fun to learn. They're so pretty. They all have their own unique patterns and structure, and then it's a fun challenge when you get out there and try to find them. So that's it. I want to say thanks again to all these awesome photographers who let me use their beautiful sparrow photo to take questions for a while now. So thank you all.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. That was a ton of information and a lot of really helpful stuff. Just as a reminder to everyone, this has been recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel for anyone to review, and we'll also share links to that video on our website and our social media profiles. So thank you again for all of that. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop that in the chat or raise your hand and I will call on you. I will start us off, Adam, with a quick question I had. Of all these wintering sparrows, do you know of any that are of significant conservation concern right now? Just out of curiosity from a
Yeah,
conservation perspective.
well, the ones in Florida aren't listed by the state or federally listed. They're in Alachua County. The Florida grasshopper sparrow is federally endangered. It's one of the rarest birds in North America. It's a subspecies, though it's not a species, and they don't occur in Alachua County. The Bachman sparrow is, well, actually, I haven't checked recently, but it's probably on the list of oh boy, I'm forgetting the list. It's probably a species of concern in various different lists actually, because their habitat is fairly specific. They like frequently burned areas. So not only if you see a bird that is in a photograph and it's got pine trees in the background, good chance that's a Bachman sparrow, especially if those pine trees are burnt and they're burnt stumps all around and burnt background. That's even more likely that you're going to be looking at a Bachman sparrow. And they need the areas to be burnt every 2 or 3 years. And once it's more than a few years, their numbers start dropping off in the area. That's why they need fairly large areas that are frequently burned. So, that would be the closest one in Alachua County. conservation concern. And by the way, I think when you listen to this on YouTube, if anyone dare listen to it again, I know I was speaking pretty quickly, so you could probably put it on like a quarter speed if you want to slow it down a little bit and hear anything. That's assuming someone is actually going to listen to this again. But yeah, go ahead. Any other questions here?
Yes, I got one in the chat from Ellen. What are the best 3 sites to visit in Alachua County to see the greatest diversity of winter sparrows?
Oh my gosh. There is the Noonan's Lake West, that's just across from the I think it's Pithlicocho Trail up on, what is it, 26 on the west side of Noonan's Lake. There's some big fields out there. That often has a good assortment of sparrows. There's Sparrow Alley, which is if you're going on Lachua Trail, if you're headed out towards the boardwalk, instead of going on the boardwalk, you just go right. There's that one big open area there, and then you can walk along the prairie. I haven't been on that in a while, but I'm assuming it's still open, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong there. And then, boy, just any big grassy area. And it doesn't have to be even a protected park. A big field with, especially if there's some shrubs out there and it's a little bit overgrown, would be good. So, yeah, Lachua Trail. Oh, another one is, oh man, what's it called? Just north of the Noonan's Lake Trail. I'm blanking on the name right now. Keep going north towards the airport, and somebody will put the name in the chat, hopefully. The completely blanked on the name of it. Anyway, any areas with big fields that are a little bit overgrown and brushy are great for sparrows. And yeah, the Christina asked the good source for the distribution bar charts. That's eBird, and that's a online resource that's free to use. And if you just type in eBird, it'll pop up. You don't need anything else. And then you go to Explore Data, you go to bar charts, you type in you get to your geographic location. It's very straightforward to find. So you can get to Alachua County, and you have to click on entire region after you do Alachua County. And then you can scroll through, and it will show every bird ever reported in Alachua County, and it'll have its distribution. And you have to keep in mind that some things, especially really rare birds, may appear to be more common in some areas because a lot of people went to go see them. But in general, there's so many birders in Alachua County and so many people using eBirds that these bar charts are really good. Gender correlation with the 2 white-crowned sparrow morphs. As I mentioned, there are equal numbers of male and female of the tan and the white-crowned morph, and every pair is a white-crowned and a tan morph. So the females of the white-crowned sparrow do the choosing. So the white-crowned morphs are dominant in males and females. So the female white-crowns that are very dominant and defend their territory well, they'll choose a tan morph male because that'll help them care for their young. And then the female tan morphs get stuck with the male light morphs, but those have a better territory, so that it ends up working out. Yeah.
Yeah, the breeding ecology of white crowns, that was really interesting. I never knew that before.
Yeah, negative
There's
assortative mating. Go ahead.
there's just one other question from Michael. With all the variation in Savannah Sparrow's appearance we get here, do we get more than one race or subspecies?
Yeah, it's possible, and I haven't really even delved into subspecies. That there are, for Savannah sparrows, there are some very distinctive subspecies, some that should probably even be different species. There's an Ipswich sparrow that winters in northeast US but doesn't get into Alachua County. It's larger and paler. There are large-billed and Belding's Savannah sparrows and some others in the southwest. The ones here could represent more than one subspecies, but within any one subspecies. So yeah, I haven't really gotten into Savannah sparrow subspecies in the east because I think they mix up, and each different subspecies is pretty variable for the ones that occur in Florida. Just darker, more blackish, a little more paler, a little more rufous. They're pretty variable here, and it's not necessarily subspecies specific. So I don't think, as far as I know, you can't identify a Savannah Sparrow in Alachua County to subspecies based on what it looks like.
Very cool. I don't see any other questions in the chat. If anyone else has one, please raise your hand. Just real quickly, I'll re-go over those announcements that we have for Alachua Audubon, especially those to join us late. What the biggest one is, we have our backyard bird tour on February 18th, which is returning for the first time post-COVID. Tickets are on sale at Wild Birds Unlimited. Also, if you're interested in volunteering or tabling at one of our houses, please let us know. And we have several field trips coming up between now and the next evening program. We do have the Bird Ramble, which is going to be this Thursday at Bar Hammock. And we also have a overnight field trip to Tall Timbers Research Station, and you can sign up for that at Wild Birds Unlimited as well.
Can I
Go ahead,
interrupt,
Adam.
Zach?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tall Timbers, that is a great field trip, not just for sparrows, but for everything. If you have not been on that field trip, if there's still room, you should sign up. It is, you'll get to see what a lot of the southeastern US used to look like a few hundred years ago. Giant longleafs with open understory. You'll probably go up to a place called Greenwood Plantation in southwest Georgia, where there's a public road that goes through this old longleaf pine area, and it's just beautiful. And then around Tall Timbers Research Station itself, just an hour north of Tallahassee, there's great sparrowing. There are many different kinds of sparrows, nice open areas, lots of shrubby areas. So you should see a nice variety of sparrows. And even if it weren't for the sparrows, just to see that, those beautiful old longleaf is worth it. So I highly recommend that trip.
Definitely. You'll also go to St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge. And as a reminder,
Yeah.
that's January 20th to 22nd. So sign up for that is also at Wild Birds Unlimited. A couple other announcements about evening programs. Starting in March, we're going to experiment with a hybrid program. So it will be offered via Zoom and in person. Look to our announcements and our newsletters for more information about that. And of course, if you're interested in joining the email list to get reminders about our programs, please feel free to email us and let us know if you don't already do so. Well, thank you so much again, Adam, and thank you everyone else for joining us. I hope everyone has a great rest of their weekend and happy sparrowing.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everybody, for joining.